Pete Snyder, born in Bridgeport, Connecticut, 1943 March.
Where did you grow up?
Connecticut.
How did you happen to get into the military?
Well, I was a basketball player at UConn, and I got to point out that they got a lot better when I left. But I was in my fifth year of college, and because we didn't take as many credits during the season, unlike now. The Army came after me, and they were telling me they would make me an officer and send me to Fort Polk. I asked what that was. They said jungle training, and of course this was in 1965, and I'm pretty much aware what Vietnam was about. So I said no, I didn't want to be an officer, and they said, well, we'll make you a sergeant and send you to Fort Polk, or you can be enlisted and get sent to Fort Polk. So I asked them what my options were. They said go to the Air Force and the Navy. Well, I've got 2200 vision, and the Air Force wasn't taking blind guys. So I went to see the Navy recruiter, and I said, you taking blind guys? He said, every bit. And I said, you're going to send me to Fort Polk? And he said, what's that? I said, sign me up. So that's how I got in the Navy. Went through OCS.
After all that, you became an officer.
Became an officer and stayed in for 26 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
When did you go to Vietnam?
Went to Vietnam in December of '67 through February of '69. I got orders 2 years to the day after joining the Navy, basically. I got orders to Vietnam in swift boats. They had about a 1.5-foot draft. They were 60 foot long, about a 17-foot wide. They had 2 Napier Deltex diesel engines in them. They're twin screws. The swift boat looks a lot like the small boats that run in Louisiana from shore to the Gulf oil rigs. They're basically, we were told they were a modification of that class of boat that was used to run back and forth from the rigs. And they're good in fairly shallow water. They're pretty quick. And that's what I heard was of course, we changed it by putting a gun tub of forward and guns aft. And I would think that we probably juiced up the engines a bit too. They said that you can do 28 knots. I did a lot better than that when they were being chased. The problem about going really fast in the rivers was that, the sandbars change. So you might have gone up last week and you figured out how to get up there. But the next week, if you go terracing up the river at maximum speed, you're going to tear your propellers off. Now you're hurt. I mean, we carry spare propellers and spare shafts, but you're not going to replace those things under fire. So you got to be very careful. So most of your patrol speeds are like 12 knots. So you would do some patrols where you'd be by yourself. Missions were 24 to 48 hours long. So you slept on the boat at night if you were able to. Got to tell you, I very seldom slept when on patrol. I'm the only officer on the boat. There's 6 enlisted, Vietnamese interpreter as well. There's not a lot of time to sleep. I mean, you put your trust in your people, and let me tell you, I had some absolutely sensational people. But there's just too many events that come up that require you to make a decision one way or the other. So if you're sleeping, you're making 20, 25-minute cat naps. That's it. And you just maybe do that once or twice a night. Then when you come back off of patrol, you get your debrief. You're home for a day. Sleep most of the day, except for the time you spend in the officers' club drinking whiskey.
Boy, that sounds like the great American pastime.
Yeah, well, it wasn't. The purpose of swift boats were primarily just to patrol off the coast and prevent gun running from the seaside into the interior. But by the time I got to Vietnam, we had suffered so many casualties in our riverine forces that they were out of PBRs, and they had to send the swifts into the rivers. So I I would say 80% of my time in Vietnam in rivers.
That couldn't have been very safe going up and down those rivers.
No, the rivers were about as wide as a two-lane road that you drive on. And usually on both sides of the rivers, more often than not, you'd have vegetation, pretty dense vegetation. Sometimes you go up the river and get shot up pretty good, and sometimes you got nothing. So that was the kind of environment we were in. The purpose of going up the river was to provide interdiction of weapons across the rivers. Sometimes the purpose was just to show the flag. Sometimes you were in direct support of Marine and Army combat operations on the shore, where you were preventing people from exiting wherever the operation was through the beach, across the river. You know, this is a 60-foot boat, about 18 foot wide, twin 50 machine guns above the pilot house up forward, 81 millimeter mortar that has full train, and piggyback 50 cal on top of it. Carried about 60 rounds split between, I would say, maybe 10 or 12 illumination rounds, some white phosphorus. The rest of it was HE, not armor piercing, just plain HE, where you'd fire gunfire, you know, H&I on the beach. You'd have enough ammunition for the 50s. Well, you know, what we learned was you never have enough ammunition for the 50s. So we would put you'd have an ammo locker in the back part of the boat, on the rear end of the boat, where you'd put your mortar rounds, and then you store the woolly phosphorus down in the cabin. There's two big carriers where you can store that and other ammunition. But we would still carry outside that all sorts of 50 cal. One thing we like to do, if you had a river patrol, we like to sort of just drift in the middle of the river when there's no sun, very little light. Put a starlight scope on the top of the 50 caliber, set the 50 to a single fire, and watch the little boat come across the river because we know where the transmission. And boom, guy falls down, all the boats go back. But that was kind of dangerous, you know. You didn't want to get too close to the shore or anything like that. But once in a while we did it. We carried M60s. We had M16s, which weren't worth a damn at that time because they would jam so much. If you got them wet, if they happened to fall in the ocean, you were able to retrieve it. You couldn't get it. It would jam. So we used AK-47s. And the 47 was nice because we could use their ammunition and our ammunition. And most of them were cosmoline, so they're primo weapons. You had to clean them up to shoot them, but they never ever jammed. Except you never wanted to use an AK anywhere near American troops because the sound is so distinctive that you get fire from the Americans because they fire at the sound. But you know, when around Americans, you'd use M60s, which was a nice little weapon. We were encouraged not to leave the boat, and I didn't need a lot of encouragement to do that. You step ashore and you can step on a punji stick, you can step on a mine. There's just too many bad things that happen to you. So we tried to stay in the boat as much as possible. Did have one or two instances where we were chasing somebody in the river, and the guy took off, went ashore and took off, and we went after him. But that was an anomaly as opposed to what we would normally do.
Did you get him?
Oh, yeah, we got him. We got him. We got a bag of information that he threw into the bushes before we caught up to him. Actually, there were two of them. We shot one of them, and we caught up to the next guy, and he popped him in the leg. And then we took his belt off his pants and wrapped it around his ankles and dragged him back to the boat, with him screaming all the way back, and it didn't hurt my feelings at all.
Well, you going up those rivers and things, you were just a target, weren't you?
Yeah, it took some learning. I can remember the first time or two I went up the rivers and they started shooting at us, and we just unload our guns on them, and then we turn around, come back, and there'd be no ammunition. So we had to go through the gauntlet. And we started to learn. Then you might fire just enough to suppress their fire, but keep a lot of ammo with you, so on the way back you can hose them down and get back in one piece without getting hosed up by them. So yeah, you had a lot of that. You go in a river and you stop a boat, and you can tell by the way that people acted whether they're bad guys or good guys. And you'd have a Mark 79 grenade launcher at each end of the boat, but you wouldn't have grenades in it. You have flechette rounds, little darts. And that would just take everybody out on the boat. You go on the boat and everything looks good till you open up the floorboards, and then there are all the weapons in the floorboards and ammunition. Then you take all the weapons and ammunition and put it on your boat. Tell them to jump over the side on their boat, and you put a hole in the bottom and let it sink. That's it.
Takes care of it.
Takes care of the problem. And of course, a lot of times you're up and you're outside the range of artillery, so they couldn't call in artillery. And sometimes you'd have to call in air support. And that was touch and go whether you're going to get it or not. As far as I'm concerned, you could take the F-4 jets and forget about them. They're useless well, I'll just say they're useless. They drop their bombs or their napalm, and it would be all over the place. But the A-12 SPADs, those propeller-driven aircraft the Air Force had, those guys could drop it on a dime. I just love those airplanes. They just come in and just drop exactly where you ask them to put it. Good airplanes.
Was that because they were a little slower and could be controlled more?
They're slow, and they didn't go as fast, and they control the ordnance much better.
Where were you most of the time?
I started out in Catlow, which is south of Saigon, where we patrolled up the Mekong River. It was that time where I served with John Kerry. I served with him for 12 weeks, and then he got his third Purple Heart and left. And he was a very distant person. He wouldn't want to. He would sit back in the back of the room by himself and grouse and grouse and grouse. He didn't want to. He wasn't supposed to be in the rivers. He's supposed to be off the coast. This is what he didn't sign. He didn't sign up for this. He wouldn't associate with any of us because we were just typical middle-class kids, and he was a rich kid. But let's say, I don't think he's changed. I don't want to leave anyone the impression that he didn't do his job. I mean, he exaggerated on a lot of things, but he did his job as a commander of a swift boat. I mean, his people came back. He did all the right things. He did his missions. But he was, one thing that bothered us was when he'd go out on patrol, he'd take an Army guy with a full motion video camera to take pictures of him. He knew back then what he was going to do. There were pictures of him. I saw some of those pictures, and it was him jumping off the boat onto land. I'm thinking, whew, Bungee Stick City, mines. I wouldn't be jumping off the boat, although once or twice I did too, when I was relatively assured there were no bungee sticks out there. But he did some pretty scary things. But I don't think he ever put his men in jeopardy. So after he was defeated for president, we had these commercials where we, quote, swift boated him. I was in one of those commercials.
Oh.
And after the and T. Boone Pickens basically paid for everything. And after he got defeated, we just coincidentally had a meeting of all swift boaters, enlisted and officers in Orlando, Florida, where the Swift Boat Association paid for everything, air flights, hotels, food, everything. And they made it clear that it was not to celebrate his defeat, har har, but it was but it was a great bonding experience. It's the only time in my Navy career I've gone to a reunion. I don't do any other reunions. That'll be the last one I ever do. Now, after that, I went up to Qua Viet, which was south of Da Nang, it's near the Batangan Peninsula, right near where My Lai is located. I want to point out that My Lai was in a free fire zone, so anytime you want to empty your ammo box full of mortars, you just dump them into My Lai, or that area. Unless the Army was doing some operations there.
It's a famous reference to some people
which is My Lai.
Hmm.
And where was that? Was that in the Mekong Delta
No.
area, or was that further up?
That was off of Chulai. There's a peninsula off of Chulai called the Batangan Peninsula. It occurred in that peninsula. I don't think it occurred during my time. But Batangan Peninsula was a notorious Viet Cong infested area. And, you know, we were allowed to empty our mortar boxes on the way back to the port because it wasn't about a 3/4 of an hour drive back to Chulai. And we were allowed to empty the weapons in there because there were no friendlies in there. So it was an extremely hostile area. But that's where we caught that trawler trying to get into the Batangan Peninsula. It got in okay, but with a lot of holes. But and I think in one of the briefs I gave pictures of it. But that didn't occur during my watch.
I was thinking that happened in 70 or 71, didn't it? So you were already out of Vietnam.
I was gone, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a totally different era.
Totally different.
That was an Arabian operation. It doesn't.
Yeah, I'm not even sure when it happened, but I knew the village of My Lai was there because it was on our maps. In Chulai, there's a river north of Chulai that you can go up. That's the south side of Da Nang. The troops in that part of the world were Koreans, the rock battalions, fearsome fighters. I mean, the story goes that in one battle, the VC tried to attack them, and the Koreans shot him, and then drew and quartered all the bodies on the battlefield. Never had another problem with it. But the Koreans did have pilfering problems from the civilians. And I remember going to a conference, and we pulled up on the pier by the Korean post, command post, and hanging on the front gate was a I would say a 12-year-old boy. He could have been 22, but had a bar through his head, hanging up there, and they had caught him stealing in the post. And I was bringing a Navy captain with me. And the captain went up to the commander of the Korean forces, who was a full colonel, and said, you know, you got to cut that guy down. He said, you can't leave him up there like that. So the Korean, not to lose face, ordered one of his officers to go up, and they just cut the guy's head off and let the body fall down. You know, I've had similar experiences with the Koreans in Norfolk when I was back in the real world. A Korean destroyer, one of the sailors had raped a girl and come back aboard the destroyers, and the police went aboard the Korean destroyer because we were what was called nested. 1 destroyer, 2 destroyer, 3 destroyer, 4 destroyers. You know, we were on next to each other. And the police went to see the captain of the Korean ship and said, we want this guy, we want to take him back. And the Korean said, no, he's our problem. And the guy said, no, we want him back. Because the captain says, okay, and you can have him back in 4 hours. Okay? The police said, okay. Korean got underway, went out to sea, hung him from the mast. Came back in with him swinging from the mast, dead, and told the police officer, you can have him now. That's the kind of discipline they had. They were tough. They were just tough. The U.S. never got attacked up from the south on Vietnam, Da Nang. So it just, that was their style. I didn't approve of it, but that's the way it was.
I was going to ask you if you had any association with the South Vietnamese civilians or the South.
Oh,
Vietnamese.
all the time. Some of my best memories are for example, off of Chulai, there were these 3 islands off of Chulai. No VC there, just Vietnamese fishermen. The best bunch of kids you've ever seen. I mean, you go there and the kids just swarm you, and you hand out candy bars or whatever you had. It really saddened me sometimes. We pull up along the river into villages, and the South Vietnamese army would take everything from them. The VC would come in and take everything from them. I mean, the people who really suffer are the civilians. And, I had no negative experiences. I had some experiences where they were angry, but none negative. Especially on the islands. We used to go out the islands just for our own R&R when we had a couple of days off. And we'd barbecue out there, and the kids would come out, and we'd give them steaks, and we'd have 3 gallons of ice cream. And all that. They'll like that a lot. But just being ordinary guys with kids, that was cool. Then I went up to Quaviet. That was a little tiny village up on the DMZ, on the river that separates North and South Vietnam. And there I lived with the Marines in probably the most austere living environments that I've ever seen. I mean, I lived in a bunker. And I remember we got there and they were so excited, the Marines were, that they had been building this mess hall for 6 weeks. And they were so excited they're finally going to get warm food. The day before they opened up the mess hall, the VC put a rocket in and blew it up. So it was back to sea rats. There was a North Vietnamese steel hull trawler coming down trying to make landfall to unload ammunition. He was spotted by the Coast Guard, which was also out there, and they notified us, and we went and intercepted it, and 3 of us, 3 boats, and ended up shooting the living daylights out of this thing, just putting a bunch of holes and mortars into this thing, and it finally beached, and we didn't see anybody get off. And this looks like people got hurt and they ran aground. But it was pretty interesting. Our job was to patrol the river from Quaviet down to Dong Ha and down through Hue. When Tet happened in February '67, we were assigned to provide gunfire support on the rivers for the Marines who were going back in to take Hue. Hue is a river that goes like this. It goes out to the ocean. The city sits adjacent to the river, and the Marines were coming in from this side and this side, pushing the NVA out that side. My job was to sit over here and hose them down as they came out, which we did. And when we ran out of ammunition, we'd run back here to the triage area where the Marines were triaging their wounded, and we would put them on the boat and take them back to the hospital ship off the coast. And then as we went back into the Hue River, there was a big long dock there where we would rearm and go back and do it again. And there was a series of 4 boats doing this. I have one little anecdote to tell you. I'm in the triage area, and the person deciding who goes to the hospital ship and who dies is a Navy corpsman. Usually he's an E5 or E4. And he's deciding which of those Marines are going to make it back to the hospital ship and which are going to die on the beach. So I've got about 12 guys on litters on my boat, and I can't take any more. But this one Marine comes walking up to me, and he keeps pushing his guts back in his stomach, and they keep falling out, and he keeps pushing them back in. I'm thinking, oh my God, think of the infection this guy has. He's pleading with me to take him back to the boat, to the hospital ship. Well, he's not one of the guys that the Marine said could come back. So I finally said, okay, told my bosun mate boats, very gently put the kid back on the boat, and we'll take him out there. This corpsman comes running up to me and says, you can't do that. I took my bars and I said, yeah, I can do that. Back off. And I took the kid out to the hospital ship. Well, about a week and a half later, I had been shot in the foot. And again, no big deal. I was going out to the hospital ship for them to put a few stitches in it and do whatever they do. And they took care of me, and I'm ambulatory, of course, because it just grazed below my ankle. And they just threw a bunch of stitches and put whatever they put in it. And I'm sitting on the mess decks where you eat, because I figured, well, I'm on a hospital ship, I might as well have a good meal, because I wasn't getting any on the boats. So I'm in there eating my steak, and up walks this Marine, and he's got a triage tree, and he's got things in his arm. It's the kid. Still get emotional. So he thanks me for saving his life. And I said, kid, I didn't save your life. The doctor saved your life. But he and I have been friends for the rest of our lives. He's still alive. We sing Christmas cards and that kind of stuff. Interesting little anecdote, though, of sometimes how you do something and you don't think about it, and it has a pretty decent result out of it. but didn't see a lot of decent results a lot of times. I mean, a lot of times you're carrying these guys back to the hospital ship and they're dying on your boat. So I mean, it wasn't, we didn't have any corpsmen on our boats, so we were all trained at first aid, but there's so much you can do for somebody who's been shot up pretty bad. I don't see how they can't come back changed because you see such mangled bodies. Yeah, and you see the worst of everything. You don't see the healthy guys coming in for a physical. You see the combat triage stuff. And I'll tell you, the stuff I saw stayed with me a long time. It's something I don't want to repeat. I wouldn't want my kids to do it either. But neither one were in combat, but they were on a carrier. That's pretty dangerous up on the flight deck. He was a flight deck corpsman.
Well, you saw an awful lot, and
Couldn't help it. You don't get you don't get to call the deal you get in the cards. You got to play the ones you get. Then I finally finished up in Da Nang. Well, in Da Nang, we would patrol the seaside from Da Nang all the way up to the DMZ.
Oh, were these ships coming out of the north?
Yes.
That were trying to supply the Viet Cong from the sea?
Yes, they're either coming out of North Vietnam, and for all I know, they could have come out of Hainan, out of China. I don't know. I know a lot of the aviation that the Viet Cong had was flying out of Hainan. But I got to tell you, the seaborne patrols were pretty boring. There wasn't a lot going on. A lot of times when we left Da Nang, we would transport certain parties north of the DMZ and let them off ashore. Then we weren't allowed to go alongside anybody, any ship for any reason, any time. And invariably you'd be doing that, and some Navy ship would call you alongside, and you tell him you can't do it, and he gets angry at you. So then up and down the coast you hear buck, 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 that kind of stuff, where guys would just give him a hard time. Some of the time we were pretty unprofessional. But more often than not, we were very professional. You never did anything that was illegal. You just didn't do it. I mean, you didn't ever do anything that was questionable. You just played it by the book, and that's how it went. Probably the closest thing not playing it by the book, the rules of engagement at the time we were in Vietnam were that before you fire at somebody, you're supposed to fire a red flare. It occurred to us that every 4 rounds in a 50 caliber belt was a tracer. Tracer is red. Close enough. Close enough. So that's how we figured it. Because I wasn't going to pop a red flare and then shoot at somebody. Forget about it. I mean, there's a lot of things in Vietnam I didn't approve of, but hey, I mostly didn't approve when they didn't give me artillery support. I didn't approve of that, but.
I was going to ask you one other question, because you mentioned the rules of engagement. Did you ever have situations where you had targets that you couldn't fire upon because you were worried about the ramifications or couldn't get the clearance?
No. Most of the situations you were going in, and there were certain parts of the land that was categorized as Indian country, and other parts were not. And you would never fire into a part that's not. And if you did fire, you got to call back, get permission, and they'd give you permission to fire. Other than that, you would never do it. But on free fire zones, which is the Indian country, you didn't need permission. You just hauled off and did it. But I got to tell you, you never saw that especially in your seaside. Once in a while, you'd have a Marine battalion or an outpost call you for some gunfire support, where the fire from the mortar was really accurate. You could train it top to bottom, right to left. And usually what you'd do is you'd fire one round and they'd say, add 200. So we know how to do that. Add 200. He said, that's good, fire for effect. Pop, 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 pop. And until they tell you they had enough. And usually when they're being attacked by an enemy force, we do a lot of that for the Marines especially. Not so much the Army. Army didn't operate in the zones we were. They're more inland. There was one night on 12 June, '68, where I was in the second area, patrol area, south of the DMZ. There was another guy north of me. All of a sudden, there was a big explosion and he disappeared. We got a call from the Marine Forward Observer saying that it looks like it was hit by a rocket and there were people in the water. So I go screaming up there as fast as I could. There was no sun, there was no moon. It was pitch black. So I had to pop illumination rounds from my mortar above me and illuminate my boat to try to see around me, and we picked up 3 survivors. I personally picked up the captain who was in the water. Terrible wounds. He was laying face down in the water. When I turned him over, his face was like chopped meat. There was no visible distinguishing features on one side of his face. His name was John Davis, and John ultimately got a lot of surgery and they rebuilt his face, but he still had brain damage. The other 2 guys were okay. They just had concussions. While we were illuminating ourselves, we were catching fire from the shore, North Vietnamese side of the shore. And then I was picking up the last guy. And we took a rocket. It came over our boat. It must have cleared the top of my boat by this far. Explodes in the water behind us, and I was standing looking to seaward. The rocket came in, exploded in the water behind me. And unbeknownst to me, I got a lot of shrapnel on my back. It was no big deal. It wasn't serious stuff, I don't think. Anyway, we took off, and we determined that it was a hind helo. We started taking evasive action. I put the boat, so the minimum amount of the boat was aimed at him, firing with a twin 50, so we had provided less of a target rather than broadside. We saw red lights. We saw him hovering above the water. We fired 50s at him for, I think, I don't know, it could have been 3 minutes, could have been 30 minutes, but probably more like 3. Anyway, his lights went out. And we never saw anything again. And we went alongside the cruiser Oklahoma City, where I delivered John Davis and all his other crewmen, and I brought them up to the quarterdeck. The officer of the deck looked at me and said, "Oh, Jesus, what's happened to you?" I said, "What do you mean?" He says, your back's all bloody." I look around. I said, "I can't see it." He said, "Well, look at your legs." And I looked at my legs, and they were a little bloody. So they sent me to the sick bay, and I'm laying on this gurney, and this hospital corpsman, I think it must have been a second-class hospital corpsman, he's taking the shrapnel, and I said, "How you doing that?" He says, "Oh, I'm using a paperclip." So that's modern medicine for you. Then they threw a bunch of hydrogen peroxide on me and mercurochrome and all that stuff and sent me back out. They gave me a new uniform from one of the officers. But I went right back on patrol, and I had to finish another day of patrol there. By the way, the Air Force and the Navy both ruled that it was friendly fire that took the boat out up in the DMZ, and friendly fire that fired at us. Our Freedom of Information Act request later on, about 2 years ago, determined that it was not friendly fire. It was, in fact, a hind helo. We in fact, had shot it down, the only American vessel to shoot an enemy aircraft down since World War II, or since Korea. And the reason they made it a friendly fire incident is that a U.S. Navy tug came in the next day, lifted the helo out of the water. In the pilot seat was a Russian. In the co-pilot seat was a Vietnamese. And they got all sorts of code books. But to cover it up, they called it friendly fire. Makes no difference to me. I mean, the guy was firing at me, didn't fire at me again. See, that Navy tug came in and they pulled the whole helo up. And we had no information on that class of helicopter up to that point. So that was a gold mine of intelligence for him. So I fully understand why they said that. Now, a lot of my crewmen were kind of upset because they felt that they did something that deserved a reward, and a lot of them wanted me to go back out and submit for rewards for that. And I told them no. I said, I'm not going to relive that kind of stuff, and I'm not about that, although a couple of my men are. I said, just be satisfied with what you got and satisfied in knowing what you did, and that should be enough. Other than that, most of my patrolling off the coast from Da Nang was pretty tame. Cat Low, there were 16 to 18 boats. Da Nang, there were 20. Chu Lai, there were 5. In Qua Viet were about 8. And in Qua Viet, the officer in charge was a Navy lieutenant. The guy in charge of all of the I-Corps Swift boats was a Navy lieutenant commander. The guy in charge of the Swift boats up in Chu Lai was me, a Lieutenant JG. But, when they started getting rocketed, we got in our boats and left. Because you don't want to stay there. Da Nang was the lieutenant commander, had everybody. Up in the DMZ, there is highly treed. When you went down the Dong Ha River to Dong Ha, that was highly treed. And you were going if you were down in the delta, it would be mangrove swamps. There are no rivers around Da Nang, so you're mostly seaside. But Hue was pretty much, the area around Hue was pretty much flat. So it depends what part of the country you're in. You adapt to whatever you're doing. There's no magic to this. All the preparation I had, and all the training I had, and I had a lot of good training, didn't prepare me for when I got shot at. It's just bizarre stuff. I started out like everybody else. I wore a flak jacket and flak pants and a helmet, and it got too hot. So off come the flak jacket and flak pants. Then the helmet went away and the floppy hat went on. You get a bit fatalistic. If you're going to get whacked, you're going to get whacked. That's just the way you think about it. You don't go out trying to win combat awards or anything else. You just go out to do your job and bring your people back. That's it. As I said, you become very callous and fatalistic. You don't dwell on the fact that I'm standing here and there's a ping off the boat, and I'm thinking, like, if I'm 6 inches to the right, I'm dead. You don't think about it. I think about it now. I don't think about it then. It's like you'd go maybe 3 or 4 days and nothing happens, then you'd have a 15-minute firefight. After every firefight, you had to submit a combat after action report. I filed 54 of them. But I had none of my combat was anything like the troops ashore, the Army and Marines. They were under some pretty severe circumstances, and absolutely nothing like the guys in World War II. But, you just go over, you do your part, and that's it. That's the way it goes. Never got any thanks, but I didn't want any thanks. That wasn't my job. My job is to do get briefed on the mission and do the mission and come back and bring all my people back. I lost 7 people. First time I went back, I guess I was about 3 months in, and my gunner's mate was aft of the boat, and we took a recoilless rifle in the back end of the boat. And I go running back there because there's smoke and stuff, and there's his head. And, I just threw up. I wasn't ready for that. And then you look at his body and the blood's still pumping out, and I'm thinking like, oh my God. And, but that was the worst. Other times, when a guy's headshot, he's gone. You don't come back. And if a guy's hit with a heavy caliber weapon, like if a guy's hit with an equivalent of a 50 in the shoulder, his arm's off. So, you see a lot of stuff like that. But most of the guys who died were head wounds. A couple were gut shot. And there's not much you can do on a swift boat that I can expound to a guy or one of my men could about what to do or not to do. You're out there, there's a big aluminum boat, and a bullet comes in, it rattles around the inside and goes out the other way, unless you're in between. So, there's not much you can do. You call in for Huey to come in if they could, and if you're in the middle of a gunfight, they're not coming in. Or if they are, one gutsy pilot will do it. And there were those who would come in, and usually they come in with a gunship as a partner, and so they'd hose them down and try to drop down and pull your guys off. And you're out there, you're hanging it all out, and And if it happens, it happens. But still, you don't get that close to them. I got to tell you, I never ran into a VC face to face. The closest I ever got was the VC pouring out of way when we were sitting there hosing them down with the 50s. Maybe we were 100 yards away. That's the closest. So for us in the river boats in Vietnam and swift boats, rather impersonal war, until one of your guys got hit and it becomes very personal. But I would say in most circumstances, if the guy's dead, there's not much you can do. I mean, you don't want to call a helo in for that. So you just put him on the deck and put him out of the way and continue with your mission. It tears up your troops. It bothered me too, but it really tears up your troops. And I found that I was very close to my enlisted people on the boat when I first went over, but I lost 3 of those guys, and the replacements I wasn't nearly as friendly with. It's just human nature. You just don't want to feel the hurt. So that's the way it was. While in Da Nang, another gory story. When you come in off a patrol, you do something called head spacing and timing on your 50 caliber machine gun. And the purpose of that is to clear a round in the weapon if it's there, and to set the timing so that the firing pin hits at the right point. One ONC came in, and I think his name was Zumal's son, Lieutenant Zumal. He came in and certified it by writing and transfer the boat. The boat was head spaced and timed. His gunner's mate went to do another head spacing timing, and Lieutenant Crosby was standing behind the gun, and the gun went off and killed him. Zumal was transferred, and lucky for him. But the only thing you could hold him accountable for, like any of us would be held, is if you certified the weapon was clear, then it better be damn well be clear. When they head spaced and timed my weapons, I went up there and checked it myself. Put it into a neutral area, fired, see if I could fire it. But even more so after that. But that happened toward the end of my tour. The hardest thing I ever did was write the letter to Mom or Dad, because none of them were married. But that was a hard thing to do. I mean, nothing you could say to make it better for them, but you still have to do it. I've got some not fun memories, and you heard a couple of them. I've had some fun things we did too. I'm in Chulai. I've been called up to Da Nang. Now we own the road between Chulai and Da Nang during the day, and at night it was Indian country. So at 8 o'clock in the morning, I needed to get a ride, and I couldn't get one, so I went to the parking lot. Now remember, in a combat zone, there's no keys for the vehicles. You just turn them on. The way they secure the vehicles, they put a chain around the steering wheel and through the rebar at the bottom. But I had brought the master key with me, which is called a bolt cutter. And I popped the bolt on the XO's Jeep. We were on the Americal base in the Army XO, who was a lot like Frank Burns before Frank Burns was immortalized. He was a West Pointer that walked around with a broomstick up his ass. But we took his Jeep, and I drove up to Da Nang, and I left it at the Army O Club, figuring that Army property to Army property. On the way home, I went back for the Jeep. It wasn't there. Somebody else had absconded with it. But there was a 2.5 ton truck. So I used my master key on it, drove it back down, and parked it in the XO's parking spot down in Chulai. I think he was highly pissed. But somebody said to me, he said, "Weren't you worried about getting caught?" I said, "What are you going to do, send me to Vietnam?" So, there were the humorous moments as well, and for example, we were going to have a cookout on our little compound on the Army base. We needed steaks, we needed beer, we needed everything you can think of. Well, I would do so. We stole an Army truck, re-stenciled the number on it to reflect the number on the Army manifest that we stole. And then we got to the supply depot, and then we had the Army supply their forklifts to put their steaks and their beers and everything else we wanted on their truck, which we stole, and then drove it back and then parked it back in the Army base. He did stuff like that. You know, it was just, you're just, you know, you go on a patrol, it's a dangerous mission, you come back, get debriefed, and then you go next morning, 2 days later, you're going back out, you get your brief and all that. But, you know, the comic relief is a good thing. I'll give you another humorous anecdote. So you fire your 50 caliber guns and you have empty belts, you have expended brass, you save all that stuff. Put it into, you have empty belts and empty, it's expended brass. Then you see a destroyer off the coast. Well, dump all the empty belts, put the empty belts on the 50s, dump all the brass around the boat, put your flak jacket on that you never wore, put a helmet on, douche yourself with water, go screaming alongside the destroyer. You're the war. What can we do for you? I said, well, I want some steaks. Do you have any pies? Do you have any lettuce? They give it to you. Then my bosun mate, who would make Viet Cong flags, his mom would send him the cloth, and we had a sewing machine. He would make the Viet Cong flag. And he even had some with blood on it because he killed some chickens and put blood on them. And he'd sell them for $20 a piece. And then as a gift, I'd give the captain an AK-47 fully automatic weapon because we had tons of them. And he thought, you know, they'd thank you for it. Then I remember myself that he can't get it back in the States because it's fully auto. But, and then we'd leave the ship and put all that stuff back in a box for the next ship. But that was the only way you can get steaks. They gave us ice cream there. It was a coconut-based ice cream, and you get all you want. And I remember another time we pulled up for ammunition off the big pier at Way. And on the pier were a bunch of these things called mini Jeeps. They're just like the smaller Jeeps. And there was an Army sergeant there, and I said, what's it going to take to get me one of these Jeeps? Because I'm on my way home. And I'm probably not going to have any firefighting on the way home because we're all oceanside. And he said, well, what do you got to trade? I said, 3 gallons of ice cream. You got it. So for 3 gallons of ice cream, I got a mini Jeep, which we pushed on the boat. And I tell you, if I ever had to get at the engines, I would have to push it off. But I didn't. And we got back to port, and we painted that green Jeep gray, put a set of phony numbers on it, and said the Swift Boat Squadron in Da Nang had their own Jeep. But that's how you got things. But, you know, in the Navy, we call that cumshaw. Yeah, you give something to get something. You're crazy when you're a young lieutenant, JG, and you know, and you kind of prove that you're bulletproof after a while. So you do nutso things. I should tell you one other story in Chu Lai. I bring my boat into Chu Lai. We're in the Swift Boat Officers O Club, where every drink is 10 cents. Beer, soda, water, wine, and there's no wine. It's all beer and whiskey. Who walks up to me but this guy and asks me if I'd catch passes for him? It's Roger Staubach. He volunteered to go to Vietnam to be a ramp officer. He was a supply officer. He was in charge of the unloading ammunition off the LSTs on the ramp, sand ramp in Chu Lai. Can't think of a more dangerous job because they would catch rockets every now and then coming in. Yet he did it. But he asked me to catch passes for him, which I did one time. And then I couldn't pick up a pen because my hands were so swollen. So, but I was told that he does that to everybody. I got to tell you, I played basketball with him, and he could have played any Division I team in the country. And in volleyball, he was merciless because we played jungle rules. That means if you go up to stop the volleyball, if someone's face and nose is in the way, that's a bonus, you know. So, but he was tough. He always wanted to be on his side. Well, there were fun things and there were not so fun things, and I try to remember the fun things more than the not so fun.
How long were you in Vietnam?
December '67 to February. I was supposed to go home in December '68, but we were going through cruise so bad, you know, in rivers. They extended us for 3 months till they can get some replacements in. So I was okay with it. I mean, I was ready to go home.
What were people like when they found out that you were a Vietnam veteran?
You know, I was kind of like, you know, I had decided I was going to stay in. And I came back and went to Newport, Rhode Island, where the people weren't so anti-military there as they were, say, in California. I didn't get a lot of negative experiences from that. I was pretty pissed off at Jane Fonda when I was in Vietnam, and I'm still pissed off at her. But other than that, I didn't see a lot of the negativity a lot of guys did, probably because I stayed in. I went to Newport, Rhode Island. I was immediately a chief engineer on a destroyer. So, I mean, I was plenty busy. I didn't go ashore very often. If I did, we lived in Navy housing on the base, so I didn't get, so I guess I wasn't exposed as much initially. And then, the ship deployed for 9 months, and when we came back, they were closing down Newport, so we took the boat down to Norfolk, which is, now you're really in the Navy area. So I didn't see as much as a lot of people did. I didn't really give a two hoots about the guys who went to Canada. No, I don't care. Those kind of people you don't want to waste a minute of your conscious thought on. I didn't.
So how long you were in the Navy?
24 years, 9 minutes, and 11 seconds. Really, 24 years and some time. It was fun. It was fun. I had command of a frigate, and then I had command of a cruiser. The first one, O'Callahan. Captain was Joe Strasser, who became a two-star admiral, academy graduate, salt-of-the-earth man. I mean, I don't think I ever met a finer person. Somebody you can pattern your life after. He had a big impact. Had a big impact on my life.
What was the name of your cruiser?
The Leyte Gulf, CG-55. Not a bad ship.
All right, great name.
As the Southerners call it, they call it the Lady Guff. Had a bunch of Southerners on that ship. About 380 people, 34, 35 officers, 5-inch 54 guns, Vulcan phalanx, close-in weapon systems, a couple helos, vertical launch missiles fore and aft. Plenty potent weapon system, man. You could do some damage with that bad boy. But the hardest thing is you're going to sleep at night, and there's some 23-year-old lieutenant on the bridge, and he's got the whole con. And he's in charge, just like I was when I was that age. But I'm thinking like, holy cow, sleep very lightly. But unless you're in some restricted waterway, if you're on open ocean, you don't care. You're not going to see much. But if you're in the Straits of Messina, you're going to see tons and tons and tons and far too many boats. But and normally you're always making that transit at night, so it's even worse. So I just go up in the bridge chair and go to sleep. I don't even go to my room, but the sea cabin. I'll tell you, one of the great things about at least the Navy I was involved with at that time and ever since, the enlisted guys are, and I've viewed the Russian Navy too. We trust our enlisted guys, and our enlisted guys are the heart and soul of what happens. If you're a captain of a ship and your troops aren't making good music, you're a lousy band leader. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. So I felt that my guys were good guys going over Vietnam, and they became great guys. I mean, all of them went up to become chief petty officers. They lived. And, one of them got out. And he's a close friend of mine. He runs a yacht club out of Maryland. So I guess he still likes small boats. So, but that's the troops are extremely well trained and they're very disciplined. I mean, I could have got shot and been out of the picture, and I'd be 100% sure that they do the right thing.
Were you on the Pacific or Atlantic?
Atlantic on the cruiser. I was XO and a tin can on a frigate in the Pacific, and both commands are in the Atlantic Fleet. Command tours are 18 months. XO tours are 2 years. But 18's enough. 18's enough. I mean, it's a lot of pressure. you got a, a $58 billion ship, 380 lives. Yeah, there's pressure. Then they sent me to. I tried to resign from my commission while I was captain of the cruiser. They wouldn't let me, so they sent me back to the Pentagon because everybody resigns out of the Pentagon. Nobody resigns out of command. So, but it was just time. I'm OCS. I'm lucky to make captain. I'm not going to be an admiral. That's not going to happen, because I'm not an academy where 95% of the admirals come from. And I suppose that's a good thing because that's they train those guys. I got a nephew going to Naval Academy. He's starting out this year. I told him if he graduates, I'll give him my sword so he can stay in the family. I've had doors closed on me. Another one opened up. I started a business in the kiosk world, and that turned out really well.
That's right. We were up there several years ago just to see that facility.
It's quite a facility. It's twice as big now.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, we toured it. We actually had a client at one point that was considering something like that. They ultimately didn't have the budget for one of those, although we really liked what the solution was.
Yeah.
It was another museum. It was another nonprofit that couldn't quite swing it at the time. We ended up doing something different with them. But
It's, those kiosks are not meant for everybody and everything, but, we built quite a few of them.
I really liked what we saw out of it. And it was really advanced, and I'm sure they're far more advanced at the time because you didn't have the kind of networking, the kind of portability that's built into the computers these days.
Yeah, almost every kiosk you build today, you can hardwire it into internet, or you can do it wireless, or you can do a digital phone, or you can call it. You can do it. Every unit ships the same way, that way, without any, with even without people asking for it. And we also give the people 3 months of remote monitoring services for free. And after 3 months, we take the cocaine away, and they have to pay for it.
That's
one way of putting it.
Well, it's a good sales tool because your remote monitoring isn't a big revenue generator, but it's a service that you're providing that somebody else might not. So you give it to them for free for 3 months, and you get to see the beauty of it, where they can capture use information and use marketing information, and then you tell them, now you got to pay for it.
By that time, they're used to it and they want it.
They were, we've never had anybody say no. Both of my kids went in the Navy. One was a combat medic, hospital corpsman on a carrier. The other was a CB. So they both followed me in the Navy. I tried to get them to go to the Air Force, but longer runways. But no. The kids know what I've done. And
that isn't always the case. We've found that a lot.
well, not in great detail, but because they know I've got a bunch of awards and I did this and that, but we don't relive this stuff.
What do you think of the role of the Navy today?
Well, the submarine force finally have a mission again with the Chinese and some of the Russians coming back. They for a long time didn't have a mission. Gotta hand it to the submariners. They're ultra professional. I mean, more so than the surface Navy. Occasionally, a submariner will get caught doing something like a little marijuana, and they take away his clearance right away, and they surface him, and they send him to me. I remember getting an electronics technician, and all my electronics technicians carry top secret clearances because of what they're working with. This guy has no clearance because they took it away from him. It was a real shame too, because he was probably the best squared away sailor I've ever seen. But just the way it happens. Of course, that man counts as an electrician against your crewman to manifest, even though you can't use it. So I had go back and forth with Washington about getting me a real electronics technician, but never works. They never listen to you. But the surface Navy is about the same as it is. It's power projection and is control of the seas because so much of our raw materials come in across the oceans. It's getting a little bit more heated now that the Russians are becoming a little bit more ornery. When I was in, we would get harassed all the time. When we went into the Black Sea, I can't tell you how we were harassed. When we went into the Baltic, same story, because the Russians consider that their ocean, but it's international waters, as is the Black Sea. So you're still in the power projection, and which is basically showing the flag. Nothing projects power better than an aircraft carrier sitting in your harbor. I mean, a big old thing, 5,000 people aboard, and it just looms out there, and it's just, or a cruiser, or we don't have battleships anymore, but I did get to go aboard the New Jersey in Vietnam, and I remember being the Jersey's out offshore, and I'm inshore, and there's the land here, and he would fire those things. My boat would rock from the concussion of the shell going over. Each shell is like a VW, so very big. My biggest fear in the mission of the Navy now is they've been cut back so far so much, and they continue not to get the kind of resources they need for training. Remember, a ship has to go to sea. You got to run those things. You got to fire weapons in practice. If you don't have the money to do that, then ships rust. And maybe the newer ships don't because they're all composites. But still, you need the training. You got to train for when the real thing happens. We don't have the money to do it now, and this Navy is down to such a small size. We virtually have no transport ships left. So how are you going to get the tanks for the Army over there? I mean, you're going to have to tell the commercial side that we're taking your ship to bring the people over there. I worry about, we used to be able to fight 2 wars at one time. Impossible. No longer possible. We're lucky if we can fight 1. So, and the Navy's not the only service. I mean, the Air Force, the Marine Corps had to sit down 80% of their aviation because they had no parts. They're out there now in the desert bringing back old aircraft just because the F-32 or something like that, they can't get it. I was just reading in the paper, but I don't keep as close to that as I used to. But if there's a hot spot flare, I don't think we could do Desert Storm again. I don't think the combined services could pull that off. But I hate to be a naysayer. I'm sure Obama would tell you that I'm all full of it, but as I found out afterwards, there were parts of South Vietnam that I went through that were covered with Agent Orange. I submitted a veteran VA request to tell them I was there, but I've had no effects. And in fact, I've had no ill effects in Vietnam at all. Have no desire to go back. A couple of my crew members have gone back to normalize. I don't have to normalize. I don't, I've even hesitated to take any ocean cruises that stop in Vietnam. I don't want to do that. I hear it's very modern now, but not important.
We've talked to people that have gone back.
Yeah, and that's good for them. And if they have to go back, I'm glad for them, but me, don't have to. I wouldn't do a thing different. I mean, the career was great. People I worked with are great. Most of my closest friends are ex-Navy guys. In fact, a retired captain and I and our families are going to Italy on a vacation. That's about our 16th or 17th vacation together. So, it's kind of a brotherhood, and you just, lose it.